The following episode features a historic article from the Nebraska History magazine. This article may reflect the language and attitudes of its time, and while it offers valuable insight into the past, may contain expressions or viewpoints that are outdated or offensive by today's standards. Any outdated terms do not reflect the current views or perspectives of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Welcome to the Nebraska History Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Goforth. Each episode, we explore articles written and published in Nebraska History magazine. Nebraska's Memorial Stadium is one of the nation's iconic college football venues. Its construction almost didn't happen due to the severe economic challenges of the time. On this episode, we find out how a tribute to the state's World War I veterans became a reality through the 1998 Nebraska History magazine article, Give Till It Hurts, Financing Memorial Stadium, written by Michelle Fagan. People say that on many Saturday afternoons in the fall, Memorial Stadium on the University of Nebraska campus in Lincoln is the third largest population center in the state. Along with the state capitol, it is one of the most recognizable buildings in Lincoln, and the two actually have several things in common. Both structures are memorials to the servicemen and women of World War I. Hartley Burr Alexander, chair of the university's philosophy department, chose the inscriptions for both. The stadium and the Capitol were major construction projects, requiring significant resources just when Nebraska was experiencing a serious economic depression. It is a tribute to Nebraskans' persistence that they were completed. Getting the stadium constructed, however, took immense effort and involved serious financial risk. The credit for seeing the project through goes to the University of Nebraska Alumni Association, especially to Harold Holtz, its executive secretary, and to all of the subscribers, willing or not. The stadium was built without state funding, and its construction depended on money pledged and paid by university students, staff, alumni, and well-wishers. When the University of Nebraska football team played its first game in November of 1890 against the YMCA team in Omaha, the campus boasted only a grandstand and bleachers. After the turn of the century, sports enthusiasts, alumni, faculty, and students hoped for something more impressive. In 1918, after the United States had been at war with Germany for several months, the student newspaper, the Daily Nebraskan, encouraged its readers to call for better sports facilities for, quote, this important part of college education, end quote. Football coach E.J. Stewart emphasized how much college athletics helped prepare young men heading for the Army or Navy training camps. The war, of course, slowed building projects on campus, but when hostilities ended in November 1918, work resumed on the social sciences and teachers' college buildings. The university's Board of Regents strongly supported more construction and placed a new gymnasium, observatory, museum, and library at the top of the list in the budget that it presented to the state legislature. The student newspaper backed the budget request, noting that Nebraska taxpayers and legislators spared no expense for housing and providing for livestock. They should treat the students equally by providing for their physical and mental development. Naturally, it hurt to learn that the Iowa State Aggies had refused to send their basketball team to Lincoln to play in the Cornhuskers' little brick barn, and this snub further fueled arguments for better athletic facilities. When the university celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1919, it needed a new gymnasium and stadium. It wanted to honor its servicemen, and it had an alumni organization willing to be more active. These goals and needs eventually melded together with the formation of the Nebraska Memorial Association. The university had 2,300 stars in its service flag, representing alumni, students, and faculty who had joined the armed forces during World War I. More than 100 had lost their lives. General John J. Pershing, who led the American Expeditionary Force, was a former military science instructor at Nebraska and had received a degree there. The goal became a permanent memorial to remind Nebraskans of the sacrifice these individuals had made for their country. In March 1919, the N Club members proposed a memorial for Roscoe Dusty Rhodes, captain-elect of the 1918 football team who had been killed in France. They considered a new gymnasium, a playing field, or a memorial tablet. The Daily Nebraskan editor thought that the gymnasium or field would be much more worthwhile than a tablet. When the Board of Regents asked official university architect Charles Hodgdon of Chicago to submit sketches for a possible gymnasium, its construction looked imminent, at least to the students. Chancellor Samuel Avery asked Hodgdon to hold the plans to a, quote, reasonable size, as one of the athletic people, Dr. Stewart, is an inflationist of the first rank, end quote. Sentiment in favor of a gymnasium or stadium hardened in the university community. In January 1920, a committee working on a memorial met with Alumni Association officials to discuss a joint effort. The Daily Nebraskan fervently supported this idea on the grounds that an athletic building would be the most fitting thing, quote, to build the physical and mental life of young people, end quote. Enthusiasm ran high, and the Nebraska Memorial Association, composed of alumni, although not officially part of the Alumni Association, was formed to begin fundraising. In March 1920, Guy Reed, a 1911 graduate, became chairman of the Nebraska Memorial Association's executive committee, and Vincent Haskell, class of 1912, was the executive secretary. The Nebraska Soldiers and Sailors Memorial was projected to be an impressive complex with a museum for public and private collections of artifacts related to the various wars Nebraskans had participated in. It included a stadium, a gymnasium, and an assembly room for veterans gatherings. Rooms were designated for the permanent headquarters of the Grand Army of the Republic, the American Legion, the Spanish-American War veterans, and other groups. The focal point of the structure would be a rotunda with pictures of battle scenes. Avery wanted a plaza with small parks scattered throughout in front of the memorial building, and Regent John R. Webster called for a broad street in front of the gymnasium. The memorial was going to be a monument to all Nebraskans who had served their country. The new association wanted to raise $1 million to build a combination gymnasium and stadium. Members decided to begin the subscription campaign during the week of May 17, 1920. Supporters in Lincoln and Omaha were expected to come up with $200,000 respectively. The people all over Nebraska would give the rest. The university community also hoped for state help. Chancellor Avery believed a legislative appropriation would have to supplement whatever money the fundraising brought in. He did not think individual subscribers would give all of the necessary funds, quote, but if we make a good showing, the legislature will supplement it, end quote. The campus fundraising began officially on May 20th, 1920, when classes were dismissed for 2 hours so students could attend a special convocation at which Chancellor Avery, Guy Reed, and various professors spoke, and the band played. For several weeks before the campaign on campus actually began, students had been urged to give till it hurts. Organizers asked the students with automobiles to help canvass Lincoln. In early June 1920, the Lincoln and Omaha campaigns began. The Lincoln press reports were upbeat. When questioned about memorials being planned elsewhere in the state, Executive Secretary Haskell emphatically stated, quote, not a community has been approached, but has been enthusiastic and promised its quota in short time, end quote. Campaign backers said public sentiment was on their side, and the $87,000 in subscriptions received from just 14 of the 25 districts proved it. These expectations, however, were overly sanguine. In the real world outside the newspaper stories, the fundraising drive was in trouble. A faltering economy and resistance from certain groups in Nebraska hampered it. Even as the Nebraska Memorial Association was establishing committees in each county to solicit subscriptions, letters came in telling of hard times, low crop and beef prices, and the animosity of some local editors, American Legion chapters, and bank managers. In Schuyler, the local editor, R.H. Adams, opposed the idea of a stadium, although he was dissuaded from writing a negative editorial. The town had already raised $5,000 for its own monument. In and around Valentine, quote, people have been through a long, hard winter. Last fall, our cattlemen were bumped hard on the market, and owing to a dry summer, the farmers' crops are short, end quote. In Albion, the banks were discouraging, quote, all kinds of collections and trading to get people back to earth again, end quote. Managers of the town's two oldest financial institutions were, quote, fully against raising this money, end quote. Some people liked the idea of a stadium or a gymnasium, but thought the state legislature should fund it. Some Nebraskans approved of the memorial, but they wanted one closer to home. Tacoma residents had raised several $1,000s to purchase a building for the American Legion, and they, quote, would rather give that much more for something which would be local and could be enjoyed by all rather than give a cent to be placed in a memorial at Lincoln, end quote. In Nance County, quote, the American Legion is making a big kick on the Nebraska Memorial Drive. They are working for a building of their own and think that it will injure their chances of putting it across if they push the University Drive at the same time, end quote. Local businessmen are standing with the local boys. The same was true in Hastings, where the American Legion Post was, quote, unanimously adverse to any such campaign in this county because they want to save all the thunder they have for their own campaign, end quote. In Saline County, some believed the ex-soldiers should be consulted, and people, quote, are inclined to question whether it, the stadium, would be the most advisable memorial for the soldiers out in the state, end quote. Local people had already collected $15,000 for a building in Crete. Quote, we hardly believe the sentiment either of the soldiers or civilians is the back of the program you propose, end quote. In the face of such resistance, the campaign ground to a halt. Perhaps the Nebraska Memorial Association had not allowed itself enough time to get organized. The reply of W. Dayton, the chairman appointed in Saline County, suggested that neither he nor his committee had learned of the project until they were informed that they were on the committee. Some committee members may not have pressed for donations as hard as they should have. Vincent Haskell, for example, thought that donating, quote, should be a spontaneous contribution from the people of the state, activated by a patriotic motive, end quote. Given the lack of advanced planning and the completion from other memorial projects, the goal of $1 million for the grand complex was unrealistic. Originally, Chancellor Avery and alumni and the Board of Regents hoped for some state funding. The Regents requested $350,000 in the budget request to the legislature. A matching sum would be raised through subscriptions. Governor Samuel McKelvey and the legislature agreed to set aside $250,000 for the stadium and gymnasium. General John J. Pershing applauded this news during his speech at the university's 1921 commencement, telling Chancellor Avery to put me down for my share, sir. An agricultural depression hit Nebraska in 1921 when wartime high prices, government price guarantees, and foreign demand all disappeared. The economic situation ultimately dominated and overshadowed all else. By August 1921, when the economic depression really began to be felt, the governor ordered all state agencies, including the university, to set up a special reserve fund with 10% of the state appropriation, which could not be spent without the governor's approval. Soon, Chancellor Avery gathered his faculty together to decide what could be cut from the university's budget. In October 1921, Harold Holtz, the newly elected secretary of the Alumni Association, decided to terminate the 1920 fund drive and reorganize the county committees. On campus, the Innocents had already reported that the spring of 1921 was not a good time to be asking students for money. Further damage to the fundraising prospects came when the governor called a special session of the legislature in January of 1922, which, among other things, reduced the university's appropriation by half. The legislature went one better and cut stadium funding from the budget altogether. The university lost this money, in part because the state budget had become a political issue just when the school had a rapidly growing student body and started asking for more money. Both Governor McKelvey, a Republican, and his successor, Democrat Charles Bryan, stood for fiscal retrenchment. Given Nebraska's economic situation, voters liked the sound of this. Some of them had already been complaining that the university was becoming too large and too expensive. Disheartened at these developments were planners in the university circles, still carried on with the memorial idea despite the bad economic situation and the lack of state funds. On April 7, 1922, the Board of Regents turned over responsibility for stadium funding to the Alumni Association. The original Memorial Association transferred all its books, a little over $14,000 in cash, and more than $100,000 in pledges to the Alumni Association. This would be the group's biggest project since it was organized in 1874. This time, the Alumni Association Executive Committee would directly oversee the fundraising. To enable the association to collect money, the Executive Committee incorporated as a separate nonprofit organization in March 1923, again using the name Nebraska Memorial Association. The new Memorial Association could buy and sell property, collect money, and sue. The new Nebraska Memorial Association set lower, more realistic goals. Instead of trying to raise $1 million, it aimed for $450,000. The gymnasium-stadium combination with the museum, meeting rooms, and pictures became just a stadium. The new association may have hoped to get something similar to the first grand plans, quote, but after the bids were opened, it was reduced to a cold, practical question of adjusting the structure to the amount of money available, end quote. During the transitional period from one memorial association to another, the architect had also been changed. Hodgdon of Chicago was replaced by John Ladinser of Omaha and Ellery Davis of Lincoln. The new architects were Nebraskans, and they had gone to the university, although Ladinser did not receive his degree there. Both men donated their professional services as their contribution to the stadium project. Harold Holtz, secretary of both the Alumni Association and the new Nebraska Memorial Association, calculated that those services would be worth between $15,000 and $18,000. Holtz was a 1917 Nebraska graduate who had been active in the Pershing Rifles and chosen for membership in the Innocence Society, a group of senior men selected for their character and leadership ability. During World War I, he had trained as an aviator and served on the Austrian front. He would be a major force behind the new stadium drive. Holtz first found out who were the graduates and former students in each county. He believed that the first committee had not asked as many of the alumni as possible to contribute, and he was not going to make that mistake again. As executive secretary of the Alumni Association, he proposed a new, updated alumni directory and relaxed membership requirements. Before this time, people who attended but did not graduate from the university were not eligible to belong to the association. Now, they could be members, would be listed in the directory, and would definitely receive pledge requests. Holtz appointed a chairman for each county and began sending these people the names of current students, ex-students, and graduates. Each county had a financial quota determined by the number of resident graduates there. The payment plan called for 20% down and 10% every 6 months. Campaign workers were told to put on a confident front, act like the pledge would be a matter of course. Holtz had a follow-up system for collecting pledges that would not let procrastinators get away. He wanted the whole campaign run like a business venture. He often told students and others that he would, quote, keep right on every delinquent account, end quote, and that the pledge was a plain business proposition that confronts us all. Fremont, with a $2,000 quota, demonstrates how a county or town was organized. The city campaign started off with a banquet at the Hotel Pathfinder. Perhaps because the stadium would be a war memorial, the newspaper described the organization in military terms. The chair had an able staff of officers. J.C. Cook, the commander-in-chief of the Dodge County squad, attended the banquet. Fremont had been divided. Earl Lee was the general of Division A, General Lee's army. His team elected captains and lieutenants. Quote, the alumni of Dodge County does not mean to be among those who failed to contribute towards the progress of its alma mater, end quote. Some chairmen and campaign workers wanted something in return for their labors. Football tickets. One of the campaign workers in Nebraska City could not get tickets for the 1922 Notre Dame game, and she was furious. Like some other people, she sent in the money for tickets, but her check was returned. Quote, "They are getting awful sore. They say Lincoln is playing the hog as usual, taking all the tickets and leaving none for the rest of the state." End quote. In Pender, quote, "4 of the boys here who are enthusiastic football fans want to go to the game, and they insist that they will not take part in the stadium drive unless they get some tickets." End quote. Donors also expected favorable treatment. A Lincoln man who gave $100, quote, "will gladly accept hereafter the privilege of making reservations ahead of the general public," end quote. Owners of the Crete Mills worried they would lose their place on the list for advanced ticket reservations because they had paid their subscription. The financial problems and opposition that plagued the fund drive in 1920 had not disappeared by 1922 and could make the county chairman's jobs difficult. In Garding County, quote, "the Beet Sugar Company and the railroads have skinned this county of all its year's profits," end quote. In Broken Bow, a man, quote, "stirred up such a rumpus in regard to the new stadium, he has created a hard feeling all over this county," end quote. The area around Bridgeport was, quote, "hard hit by the financial depression," end quote, and many businessmen could not collect money owed them. Quote, "Every day or so, somebody turns his stuff into the bank and skips the county, leaving his creditors holding the sack," end quote. Mother Nature and bad roads kept some county organizers and solicitors from getting a quick start. The worker assigned to Cass County was ready to go on as soon as the roads there dried. In Cheyenne County, the weather made it impossible to get out into the county immediately. Lincoln businessmen greeted the stadium drive with open arms. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce worked as the soliciting agent for the Alumni Association to meet its $150,000 quota. Many members had probably attended the university, and the proposal looked like a good business opportunity. They were not unmindful that the stadium would contribute, quote, "to the welfare of all the interests in the city more than any other thing that has come into our life," end quote. The citizens oversubscribed by $15,000. Familiar corporate names appeared among the large donors, including Woods Brothers for $5,000 and Miller and Payne for $10,000. The Omaha Drive, on the other hand, caused grave concern. In April 1922, the regents and several Omaha men met to discuss a strategy. Holtz often complained that the city's fundraisers were not doing anything. In February 1923, he pressed the organizers to get everything done before Creighton University started its fund drive. Holtz reported to the Board of Regents and Chancellor Avery that he had been, quote, "extremely disappointed in the campaign in Omaha. We are informed, however, by Regent F.W. Judson that the balance will be raised, but the delay in this matter has been extremely embarrassing," end quote. In April, he urged Judson to finish the Omaha Drive. Quote, "The amount which we have been expecting from Omaha is the amount which stands between having the stands for our football season this fall or not having them," end quote. Around the state, the drive did receive support, sometimes from unexpected sources. Many counties and towns subscribed their quota. Some even oversubscribed, like Clay Center, where Chairman Charles Epperson Jr. reported that most of the donors were businessmen who had not gone to the university. But this is a great football town. Cy Sherman, the Lincoln sports writer, who named the football team the Cornhuskers, also contributed. So did alumni like George Flippin, a former football team member and the first African-American player, and Carlos Ulmanis, who had returned to his native Latvia and had become the nation's prime minister. A winning football game made one fan enthusiastic enough to increase his total donation to $1,000, quote, "because of the very good work done by the team this day," end quote. Edwin Squires from near Broken Bow donated 2 pigs he was raising. The animals, quote, "will doubtless be auctioned off at the Syracuse game," end quote. Inmates belonging to the State Penitentiary Dramatic Club staged a performance for the general public, with the proceeds going to the stadium fund. Quote, because of the kindness of the university to the penitentiary, the inmates felt that they really owed this much, end quote. High schools and at least one grade school donated money. Lincoln schools, of course, gave, but so did those in Beatrice, Aurora, North Platte, Edgar, Wilbur, and Pender. On campus, the Innocence Society had charge of organizing the drive among the students, but the Alumni Association also planned to get pledges from faculty and staff. The faculty and staff were encouraged to pledge a percentage of their salaries to the stadium fund. L.F. Seaton, the operations supervisor and purchasing agent, canvassed all the physical plant employees. Pledge commitments followed staff even though they had left the university, as one faculty member who moved to the University of Arizona found out. In October of 1922, the Innocents set about tapping the student body by talking to the presidents of the fraternities, the sororities, and honor societies like Mortarboard or Silver Serpents. Student leaders strongly encouraged each president to make a big sales pitch to the members of his or her group and challenge them to reach their quota before any others. The campus drive organizers counted on each student pledging $25, payable over 2 years, for a total of $90,000. 200 campaigners set out with a goal to approach every student. They worked in pairs and were told that the results were what counted. Canvassers also had to report on the outcome of each contact. The student drive netted $112,000 in subscriptions. The Nebraska Memorial Association promised that home games would be played in the new stadium in the fall of 1923. When enough pledges had been subscribed, although not all had been collected, the association risked letting the contracts. Parson Construction Company of Omaha would build the stadium. The firm bid $548,849, which was, quote, more than $100,000 above the amount now available, end quote, forcing the Memorial Association to eliminate some features of the plan until more money could be raised. Colonnades enclosing the north and south ends and a tower section in the east stands were eliminated, but the seating capacity of 30,000 was not reduced. Roberts Construction of Lincoln received the grading contract. All excess dirt would be sold to the Lincoln School Board. The construction schedule called for Parsons to finish the concrete and steel work on the west grandstand 120 days after starting, and on the east grandstand within 130 days. The wooden seats would be installed 30 days after the stands were finished. The company kept to its schedule and must have had university students in the workforce. Holtz was gratified, quote, to know that a great deal of the actual work on the stadium was done by students who were working their way through school, end quote. On April 26, 1923, at the stadium groundbreaking, Chancellor Avery turned the first earth ceremoniously with a plow and team, quote, throwing the reins over his shoulder in true dirt farmer fashion, end quote. In June, the Cornerstone Lane was the highlight of the second Cornhusker Roundup of the alumni, even though the weather did not cooperate. L.W. Parwick of Lincoln donated the cornerstone. A severe wind marred the ceremonies by blowing down the frame holding the service flag back of the speakers, causing much commotion. The flag fell on the key speaker, Byron Arnold, an 1897 graduate of the university's engineering college. On numerous occasions, Holtz stated that none of the students had been coerced into pledging, but the peer pressure must have been tremendous. A former fraternity president recalled, quote, the exuberance of fraternity spirit when our fraternity, the same as the others, was endeavoring to make the biggest possible subscription to the stadium, end quote. He subscribed for several members and was left to pay the entire pledge. During the 1922 campaign, one student said that he could not afford $25, but he could give $5. When he received his receipt, he discovered that he was credited with a $25 pledge and still owed $20. Alvine Kemper complained that she felt intimidated into signing a pledge, quote, by a group of men who gathered after one of the class periods, end quote. A friend of hers who did not pledge was thrown into the YMCA swimming pool. Some students might have felt hounded for subscriptions. But in some cases, the Memorial Association did not have an easy time collecting the money pledged. Holtz warned that student checks are very hazardous to hold. They had to be cashed right away. Students, like faculty and staff, presumed that if they left the university, they were not obliged to continue paying. Some parents of university students refused to make good on their children's obligations for such, quote, foolish things as stadiums, end quote. One complained that, quote, you went after our boys and girls to get them to sign up for that old thing in the first place. You know better than to go to the parents, for if you had, there would not be any stadium, end quote. Amanda Newman Grove wrote that his son did not have the money and the father refused to pay the debt. Holtz and the Alumni Association had good reason to press hard for payment. As he told the California Alumni Group, the association, quote, had virtually mortgaged our souls in order to keep faith with those who have already subscribed, end quote. Everything had been pledged to the contract. Holtz explained to the father of one delinquent student that the stadium drive had netted $350,000 in subscriptions and only $100,000 in cash. To start building, the Nebraska Memorial Association used the unpaid $350,000 and the mortgage of the future stadium as security on a $300,000 loan. Since many financial institutions were reluctant to lend on such ephemeral collateral, George Holmes of the First Trust Company of Lincoln and a member of the Memorial Association worked out a loan by persuading 6 associated trust companies to come aboard. Holmes arranged a 5-year bond issue. The university's athletic association bound itself to pay $20,000 a year, and the Board of Regents pledged, quote, that they would secure additional funds if necessary, end quote. At that time, some 750 students on campus were delinquent in paying their pledges, and another payment on the bonds would have to be made in April of 1924. The total of unpaid subscriptions had reached $30,000. Holtz told one of the complainers, quote, this is not an item to be sneezed at, end quote. Holtz and the Memorial Association tracked down procrastinating subscribers with a vengeance, sometimes years after the stadium was already in use. He said that the operation would be handled in a very business-like manner, and he meant it. In 1928, 5 years after the drive began, the association sued 25 delinquent subscribers. The writer of an insufficient fund check was told, quote, if you don't pay, we will turn it over to our county attorney for prosecution, end quote. Holtz probably got tired of harassing people for money, and he admitted that getting the stadium built sometimes seemed like a hopeless proposition. Quote, yet I am not willing to give up the ghost, and I think that in time we will collect a lot of this money that does not look at all promising now, end quote. The pledge of a Lincoln real estate firm was pursued through the courts. The Memorial Association sued Christian and Herman Company for the $250 and won in municipal court, quote, but getting a judgment against these parties did not seem to have any effect on them, end quote. The next step was to try to impound Charles Herman's Cadillac Coupe and George Christian's Packard. Christian escaped by claiming that the car belonged to his wife. Next, the lawyers garnished Christian's bank account. The businessman and his attorney tried to argue that his money was exempt property, but apparently the Memorial Association was finally able to collect the pledge. Even the law firm that handled these matters for the Memorial Association had qualms about, quote, various attorneys who have not paid their pledges. We are dealing with these men day in and day out, and probably will for a number of years to come, and to gain their enmity would simply not be using our best judgment, end quote. Why not turn these bills over, quote, to some young attorney who can sue these gentlemen without embarrassment, end quote. Some pledges proved impossible to collect. The Geekus Brothers restaurant went into bankruptcy before the company had completely paid its subscription. Another Lincoln subscriber, Katsutaro Ito, owner of the YMCA cafeteria, quote, is supposed to have gone back to Japan, end quote, and it was impossible to trace him. A few pledges were forgiven, but the circumstances were usually extreme. Dean C.B. Engberg, for example, forwarded a letter from the mother of one student with a delinquent subscription with his request that it be canceled. Engberg knew the family. The father had recently died. The mother and son were both working, and the father, quote, by the way, had disinherited him in favor of the University of Nebraska, end quote. Most requests for a cancellation of a subscription were denied. When the Enterprise Planning Mill of Lincoln suffered a fire and dropped its pledge, Holtz noted sarcastically, quote, that fire was as valuable to the Enterprise Mill as the post-war inflation in Germany was to the German government. I cannot quite see wherein the Enterprise Planning Mill is justified in canceling their obligation. They still exist as a corporation, and we should collect, end quote. After starting the drive in Nebraska, Holtz turned his attention to the alumni who had moved elsewhere as he assigned quotas to various alumni groups. Sioux City, Iowa was to raise $940, alumni in Alabama $30, and those in California $5,700. In February 1923, Holtz hoped a trip back east would drum up enthusiasm and $12,000 to $15,000. During a meeting of the alumni group in Detroit, the organizer planned to tune in a Nebraska football game on radio, quote, though we may have some difficulty because of local interference, end quote. Hearing the game would help put the listeners in a mood to donate. The Nebraska track team attended a meet in Southern California with a double mission, to win and to talk to the California alumni. Quote, these boys must feel the most royal welcome, end quote. Holtz urged the California Cornhuskers, quote, they will tell you of the most magnificent new stadium, end quote. Harry Minor, the campaign organizer in California, gave his drive a Hollywood touch by showing the film of the 1922 Nebraska Notre Dame football game, a Nebraska victory, by the way, to all the alumni groups in the state and in Washington, Oregon, and Utah. He asked Holtz to send slides of campus buildings and, quote, characters connected with the university, such as Avery, end quote, to evoke memories and open wallets. By the fall of 1923, Holtz and the Alumni Association knew another round of fundraising would be necessary. He contacted all of the county chairmen to see how a second drive would fare. In Tecumseh, the feeling was not good. Responded J.B. Douglas, quote, right now, money matters are more stringent than they have been for some time, end quote. And public opinion there favored having Lincoln complete it, quote, since outside trade brought to Lincoln would be doubled and trebled, the credit accruing to Lincoln businessmen only, end quote. Walter Raish of Central City suggested November would be the best time when, quote, the most enthusiasm for anything of this kind can be aroused during the active football season, end quote. Homecoming and the dedication of the stadium would be the high points, but after the season, quote, the enthusiasm immediately begins to subside, end quote. The October 1923 fundraising campaign on campus coincided with the dedication of the stadium and caught all of the incoming freshmen, who were told that they would get more use out of the stadium than any of the upperclassmen who had already pledged. On the evening of November 5th, pairs of innocents and mortarboards, members of the upper class honoraries, visited each fraternity, sorority, and dormitory to secure pledges from the freshmen. The next day, all the freshmen were strongly encouraged to attend a rally in the Armory, where they would get another chance to pledge. To check attendance and catch any absentees, the organizers may have asked each freshman to sign a card and hand it in as he left. Subscribers got to wear green ribbons with their graduation year on it around campus. Junior and senior organizations planned to round up all the delinquent freshman subscribers at the end of the week. Freshmen in the ROTC program could transfer their uniform deposits to the stadium fund instead of reclaiming them. Quote, your refund is payable May 23rd through the 28th. You have not missed this 10 spot for the last 9 months. Why not put it to good use and relieve yourself of an urgent obligation, end quote. Holtz suggested having a student canvasser posted where the uniforms were turned in. A person with some salesmanship ability would be best. Nebraska played its first game in the new stadium on October 13th, 1923, against the University of Oklahoma, even though the east and west grandstands were not quite complete. Parsons Construction Company officials notified the Nebraska Memorial Association that it and not the company would be responsible for any injuries to the spectators. The contractors also warned the association to have its architects check the structure, quote, to determine any possible danger of falling timber, formwork, or debris, and to determine what parts of the structure at this time have developed the strength necessary to avoid collapse, end quote. Guards should be posted on the ramps leading to the balconies to keep people out. Fortunately, the game was played without any mishaps. Memorial Stadium was dedicated on October 20th at the homecoming game with the University of Kansas. Before the game began, a parade of students and alumni gathered at 12th and P Streets, wound through downtown Lincoln to 16th Street, then marched back to the stadium. The financing and construction of Memorial Stadium had not been without risk, but the Alumni Association had kept its promise that the team would play there in 1923. The stadium cost $482,938.82. By eliminating some features, the Memorial Association had been able to trim nearly $66,000 from the Parsons Construction Company bid of $548,849, bringing the total much closer to the group's original goal of $450,000. Memorial Stadium never included all of the features that the first war memorial plans called for, such as the museum. Harold Holtz reported that the stadium would be finished, quote, only so far as the money available allows, end quote. The oval ends and the colonnades would not be started until they could be paid for. With agriculture in the state already depressed when the Great Depression began, the necessary funds never materialized. The circular, precast concrete medallions of the official seals of the Missouri Valley Conference schools were completed around the exterior walls. The Alumni Association contacted Gutzon Borglum about making bronze memorial tablets to flank the east entrance, but they apparently were never finished or installed. In August 1927, First Trust turned the mortgages over to the Memorial Association, and Holtz was able to announce in 1928 that all contracted debts had been paid. Characteristically, he also stated, quote, let no one gain the impression from the fact that the stadium is paid for that all unpaid obligations will be canceled, end quote. The Memorial Association finally closed its books in 1940. It was not until 1972, when an addition to the South Grandstand was constructed, that the Oval Stadium was complete. The Nebraska Memorial Association, the Alumni Association, and their supporters had taken a serious financial risk, but their efforts were rewarded. They gave the university and its students a usable stadium in 1923 that, with numerous later additions and improvements, continues to serve the university's nationally recognized football program. Thank you for listening to the Nebraska History Podcast. To learn more about Nebraska History Magazine, to listen to more podcasts, or to support our podcast by becoming a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, go to history.nebraska.gov/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when we release new episodes on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, I'm Chris Goforth.